Hi folks, I just wanted to say thank you before we get started for inviting me to offer this homily in this season of Lent and on this very special Sunday, which marks the 2-year anniversary of COVID-19 in our territory. I just want to say thank you to each of you for the courage, the compassion, the wisdom, the strength that you've provided to our community during this time to make countless change, to make every effort for the well-being of all people. And to stretch ourselves to new horizons that we never thought were there or possible. I think the things that we have done are amazing, and as we continue into our 175th year, I'm excited to celebrate each of them with you as we reopen our parish. 2 years ago today, a small group of us came together to our parish for our last Sunday for what would be a very long time. I can remember the weather, the air, the level of light in the church. It was still odored by the sweat and perfume of bodies passing through, and the candle smoke that had lingered there for years. We had known for several weeks that a crisis was lingering, emerging, and on this day the province announced that a shutdown was needed. I read 3 poems to you on this day. I planned them out well in advance to speak about crisis. A much more intimate crisis than COVID-19 that was revealing itself in our downtown core. I was hoping very much at this time to draw attention to the pressing and emerging needs that were unfolding before us. A change in the landscape that became more and more impossible to brush aside, impossible to remove from your heart if you saw it. That the things that we propped up as distractions became so obvious and flat in our spirits. Sadly, at this time 2 years ago, a crisis of hopelessness was emerging. A generational crisis that felt so obvious, but so hard to eloquate. That someone of my age could not see a future for themselves. A generation of crises. Through the density of challenge, we could not see time expanding for us. Through daily warnings of climate collapse, we saw industry clawing through the earth to scrape every scrap of lithium into the thing that makes our phones work. Through their own scraping together of a living, we saw an immense speculative wealth gap, wagering the future outcomes of our society as the ease of money went to a select few. While we put on our boxed Calvin Klein shirts from Winners and rode the bus to work, begging from this class's approval. Through gig work or driving for Uber Eats and basement apartments shared between 3 people, through the glint of the sun burning directly at our inner eye from a condo or office building, while that sun was obscured from ever touching our skin. These were lucky experiences of life, to be sought after, to not live in the danes of commuting by 3 buses to a far corner warehouse at the airport amongst gray-faced commuters exhausted before they even got there. I watched as so many people my age picked up a needle, bright, shiny people that became exhausted in trying to summon their hope or will or whatever you want to call it. I watched too as they disappeared and died, a slow-motion suicide. All of this was running as if background noise, like the crane erecting the tower, banging it together, or the borehole boring heavily and loudly into the hole that we know is happening, but assume it's just part of a building all of the stuff that we are building. At the same time, we would receive in the mail a public approval process for another massive screen in Young Dundas Square that will really enhance the whole shopper experience in the area. Something specifically to take notice of in the landscape. It's grim. It was a grim time. It's hard to explain in other words than this, that we, a grieving generation, go into a future that every moment we are reminded does not exist. Through total inability to make change at any level, as wars rage, biochemical steam weapons are deployed to kill innocents and unmanned drones destroy cities and towns. That sea levels rise and fires rage and the air is poisoned. that police can come to your house, kick in your door, throw you off a balcony, and leave with impunity without investigation. Rest in peace, Regis Korchinski-Paquette. At all levels we grieve. Our hopelessness and agony in the face of a barbaric world that we have inherited. Sometimes I feel like it's hard to capture these things, that they live so obviously in plain sight. How do you say what no one wants to hear? No one seems to want to acknowledge the things that are being pushed to the side. I am still trying to figure this out, and I'm not sure if it is something that ultimately will be possible. It's complicated to find the words to describe the crisis of societal hopelessness we face, because it is more of a feeling that needs to be felt, and I am not sure we can feel it unless it really becomes intimate to us. As a society, we have made numbing and distraction from this pain a prerogative, to decidedly not feel, which is hard for us to feel, which makes it especially difficult to communicate how serious of a situation we as a society have landed ourselves in. So back to these poems and trying to make an expression. I used to follow around this woman who was a bereavement counselor. I'd follow her around as she would do her work. I would assist her as she would work with groups who have faced traumatic losses and deaths in their communities all across the province. One time I asked her about what to do if people are holding in their pain. How do you give them a shape to their loss that they cannot express or find the words for? She gave me the example of this person whose wife lived in a hospice near Peterborough. It was a new building, kind of like the institutional, not institutional long-term care homes that are part of the Canadian modern industrial complex. One window facing into a nothingness bulldozed to make the center, or a parking lot on the other side. The residents look out their windows into suburban desolation. Each week, she would go and visit this man and his wife in their room. He was a tradesperson from the area who worked to build a life for his family, who was taught never to cry, to not be weak, to never express the things inside, traditional values. He maybe knew it was part of her role there, but he was wary to offer anything about what he or his wife had gone through. The diagnosis, the waiting, the slow decline, the loss of autonomy, it all lived inside him. Things that he held in composure, to be able to remain in the room with his wife, to look out that window together. So my friend met with him each week for weeks on end, time spent talking about the weather or the news or trivial small talk things that you would say to a cashier as they both looked out in this bleak window into the southern Ontario unproclaimed landscape. One day when she arrived in the room, she looked out the window and there was a birdhouse on a post put in the ground in the center of the window. She asked him who had put the birdhouse in the window, and he told her it was him. That they loved looking at the birds together from their bay window at their home, and how they would change throughout the seasons. Then it poured out, how he had argued for many months with the home care workers, and then family services, and the doctors, and the CMHA interveners, to let his wife stay at home with him. How difficult it was for him not to have her at home, and all of the myriad of things he did not know how to do for himself that she had done over the years. Then came the tears that she was dying. Something had happened in the building of the birdhouse in that desolate landscape. Something shifted inside him. The instrumental griever awoke to feel something that could no longer be pushed aside through protest, denial, anger, or any of the protective coping strategies he once employed. He made it real through this act of tenderness for his wife, through the building of a birdhouse. After his wife had died, he continued to make birdhouses, and on returning to the hospice center years afterwards, this woman I followed, my colleague, said that every room had a birdhouse in the window, some of them even two. He continued his work to make sure that that landscape was changed. What do we build in the face of desolation? What can be born from our hearts to acknowledge a grief too great for words? Lent is a great uncovering, a time when the landscape of our hearts become opened, like the snow melts and the remnants of which has been discarded becomes exposed. Lent is an invitation to explore and give shape to that which we have buried within, that which we have been unable to name, that which we seek to hide. In those places of desolation, barrenness, and uncovering, the revelation of the Spirit blows a soft and generative wind. A warm wind comes from the south, inviting us to tenderly give expression to pain and grief within. Where has the Spirit led us? What have we built in the wake of the crisis of our day? What are the birdhouses in our windows, bringing new song and promise of spring to the window of our soul? 2 years ago, I wrote these 3 poems about all I had seen through the eye of my feelings, to help to try to express the generational loss that we had been facing. I wrote 3 poems and I read them to all of you in hope that they would draw you into my consciousness, and I wanted each of you to see what I was holding within me. I'm not a poet by nature. It was just the only craft available to me to try and communicate this. It felt like as close of a change as I could make, to draw attention of those nearest me. After reading those poems aloud, the world stopped. By the time I had finished speaking, the province of Ontario had made their announcement and stopped time, stopped all that I was speaking and holding, and everything left. We faced down a new desolation, a pandemic that would last longer and claim more lives than we could even imagine that Sunday in March 2 years ago. The world shuddered and in the downtown core, I was alone with these things again. Attention turned to the crises and the stress and the worrying, and the streets emptied and people fled, fearing illness and death. Many of us were shuddered alone, left with our generational wounds once again. And in the abandoned downtown core, we heard only the cries of all of those disenfranchised, those whom society has sought to erase and invisibilize, crying out to be seen in agony. They were the only ones left. It is a weird occasion to mark in memory how this all happened, and I've spoken many times to you of all of the positive things that have come, of all of the signs and lampposts of hope that we have been able to build together, and with diverse communities we worked in the wake of this desolation. Jesus in the gospel message creates the same tactility of his expression of pain. In the face of persecution of his people, from Roman imperialism and colonization, and an increasingly injured and hopeless world, his response is to cast out demons and perform cures. The act of his hands and his heart in the world that brought divinity to an afflicted people, that brought a shape and a hope to loss. Leave me alone. I am casting out demons. I am performing cures. The background noise is silenced. The focus is clear. This is the hope. Despite the looming betrayal and crucifixion, we have inherited and are baptized into the energy of love that cannot be contained but expands and stretches us beyond our limitations and imaginings. The building of concrete hope and healing in a desolate plain. Together throughout the pandemic, we have stood alongside our community for the duration of great suffering, and a myriad of successes and firsts were derived from this energy. I'd like to recall to your memory now one of our beloved heroes who was so dedicated and fearless in building sanctuaries of spirit and heart in the wake of loss. And we've celebrated this person on our social media, Instagram, and I hope that we can show a photo in memory today. We have one photo of Ian Soughton, who courageously would take the subway down before vaccines were available to the Church of the Holy Trinity to bring sandwiches to the church to keep and expand the People's Presence program despite the challenges of a new COVID reality that we were faced with. Let's take a moment and remember and honor all of the loved ones we have lost in this time, and I know that they are countless. For me, they now number in the tens to hundreds. I'd like to take a moment just to invite you to unmute or silently speak the names of those we have lost or those we wish to remember. I invite the memory of Ian Soughton, of Johnny Longhair, of Wild Bill, and I invite you to join me. Their memory is not forgotten. Their courage and spirit and commitment to building creativity and love and mutual care burns on in our hearts and future as a community. As we face the unknown in these uncertain times, may their memory be our hope and guide in what we build and what is revealed as we await the dawn of spring. Amen.